forward. Okay, welcome everyone. I can see a couple people are just still joining us, but welcome to our presentation today, CBT Tools for Rapid Recovery from Social Anxiety, Self-Talk, Exposure, and Shame Attacking. We have a lot of exciting material to try to cover in an hour, and we'll also take a couple of questions at the end. This is going to be presented today by Angela Krumm, Shweta Gandotra, and LJ Davis. And we always like to make sure we give credit to Dr. David Burns, who developed many of the methods that we'll be teaching you guys about today. So let me start actually by welcoming our presenters. So I'll introduce you first to Angela Krumm. Angela is a licensed counseling psychologist and the global clinical director at the Feeling Good Institute. She's a certified level 5 master therapist and trainer in Team CBT. With nearly 2 decades of unwavering commitment to the fields, Dr. Krumm has cultivated a wealth of expertise in the application of CBT, with particular emphasis on addressing anxiety disorders and a special focus on enhancing social skills. She's been featured alongside Dr. David Burns, covering numerous topics, including curing social anxiety with flirting training. Dr. Krumm's dedication extends beyond her clinical practice as she imparts her knowledge to therapists locally and internationally. And I'll introduce you next. Our other featured panelist is Shweta Gandotra, and she has a Ph.D. in psychology and is an associate marriage and family therapist and an associate professional clinical counselor. Shweta taught psychology for 11 years at the university level in India and has published papers in the areas of stress, coping strategies, resilience, mental health, and well-being. And her therapy experience includes working with adults, teens, and children who struggle with stress, anxiety, depression, habits, and addictions. She's a certified level 1 therapist in Team CBT and is also certified in the Addiction and Recovery program from Stanford University. And she looks forward to sharing her insight and skills with you here today. And finally, our last featured panelist, LJ Davis, is a licensed professional counselor serving clients online and in person in Carlton, Georgia. He's a level 4 Team CBT trainer and therapist, and he's been treating clients for 15 years. LJ was named FGI's Up and Coming Trainer of the Year for 2023. He leads our Core Skills practice group that accompanies our Core Skills of Effective Therapy course, and he assists with our comprehensive online CBT training for therapists. LJ has experienced social anxiety himself, and he loves helping others to overcome this challenge and looks forward to sharing his knowledge with you today. I will just cover one more slide, and then I'm going to pass the reins over to Angela. So just to let you know who we are, who it is that's bringing you this presentation today. So the Feeling Good Institute, our mission is to alleviate suffering by elevating the practice of therapy. We started, Angela Krumm, myself, and Maor Katz started the Feeling Good Institute, and we all have been mentored by Dr. David Burns at Stanford University. We train and certify therapists in processes of evidence-based CBT that are known to be most effective, including the use of measurement, empathy skills, increasing motivation, and reducing resistance, and lots of CBT strategies, which we'll be focusing with you on today. Our therapists are highly skilled and vetted, and we all engage in a weekly system of continuous improvement, practicing therapy skills in a deliberate practice model. We have flexible services to meet clients' needs. We have video-based treatment across the US and Canada. And we also have kind of brick and mortar treatment centers in New York, Silicon Valley, Canada, and Israel. And all of our therapists offer outpatient therapy, traditional kind of weekly therapy. We also offer intensive therapy where people fly in from out of town or drive in from out of town to receive more concentrated therapy several hours a day, several days a week in order to be more sort of efficient and sometimes cost effective. And we also have lower fee options. So now I'm going to turn it over to Angela.
Thank you so much,
I'll say
Jill.
one more thing.
Oh,
Sorry.
please.
I just realized
Oh, yeah.
I'm also in charge of making sure that you all get your CE credit. And so I'll just remind you that at the very end of the presentation, you must be on. At the end of the presentation, we will drop the link in the chat box to make it really easy for you to fill out the CE survey. So make sure you're here for the whole presentation. You'll click the link in the chat box that will open up the CE survey. It will take you just a minute or two, complete that CE survey, and then we'll send you your CE certificate of completion within a week. Okay,
Thank you, Jill. That's so important. Yeah, thanks for going over that and for your awesome introductions, which always makes me feel a little awkward and humble hearing all those nice things. I don't know, Shweta and LJ feel the same way, but I'm excited to be here today. I really love teaching about social anxiety disorder and I love treating it. I also want to acknowledge that sometimes I get nervous when I'm presenting around anything. And I think today the nervousness I feel is just really wanting to do right by you all. You showed up today and are here to receive information. And so I have this like strong wish to make this really helpful and meaningful for you. And sometimes the more I care about something, the more nervous I get and the more pressure I put on it. So I come today just imagining all these familiar, awesome faces who I love from the Team CBT, David Burns community here, as well as new faces. So I just want to welcome to the community and hope to get to know over time. So we're glad you're here. We have a couple specific learning objectives today. And of course, I hope you learn a lot more than just the two things you see here. But at a base level, we want you to leave today being able to name at least 3 common negative thoughts that are really characteristic of social anxiety. And we also want you to be able to describe the purpose of shame attacking exercises. We'll talk about other cool exercises as well. So what you can expect today is that we'll spend just a bit of time on the background around social anxiety disorder. Then we'll talk about 2 ways of intervening with clients. One is the cognitive model and the other is the exposure model. You'll hear from Shweta more during the cognitive model and LJ more during the exposure model. We're going to use a case example that I worked with recently, just this past summer, kind of throughout the presentation today. And as Jill said, we'll try to save some time for some Q&A. Okay. So why is this important? Well, social anxiety disorder is one of the most common types of anxiety disorders, at least in the US. So prevalence rates sit somewhere between 7 and about 12%. Now, keep in mind that that's referring to folks who actually meet diagnostic criteria. And what we most know from being humans in this world is that, or what we mostly experience is that nearly all humans experience some degree of social anxiety or performance anxiety from time to time, even if they don't meet criteria. And so when you remember that, of course, the prevalence of symptoms of this is often much higher. Right? So social anxiety disorder is defined by a persistent fear of negative evaluation by others in social or performance situations, right? So again, that could mean socializing or public speaking or different types of performance. And it's what we consider a very heterogeneous condition. And what that means is that it can look really different across different people. So for example, some people may feel a lot of social anxiety in large groups, whereas others might only experience it in very small settings, like one-on-one, right? Some people may experience it exclusively with peers, right? You might work with children or adolescents who say, oh man, I feel it a lot with peers, but I'm totally fine if I'm talking to elders or, people of a different generation, or it might be the opposite there, right? Potential dating partners might create anxiety for folks, but not more platonic type relationships, right? So we can really see different settings, different ways in which it's impacted. And despite the variation, there's a shared fear of being rejected, appearing foolish, or being the center of attention. Right? And so to meet diagnostic criteria, like with most diagnostic criteria, there has to be significant impairment, right? And that can be occupationally, academically, or interpersonally. Okay, so I've mentioned that I think it's pretty common, and I'm super curious among this group to what degree you all have felt anxious when socializing with others. So I'm not asking if you've met criteria for the diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, but to what degree you have actually experienced this. And Jill's going to help us out. You should see a poll appearing on your screen. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, but you're simply going to answer the poll as it pops up. And a lot of you are already doing it. Awesome. Cool. Wow. Results are flying in, which is super fun to see. I'm going to give it just another moment for people to respond. So to what degree do you feel anxious when socializing with new people? Okay. So I see 6% are saying not at all. So we have 6% of our participants are super enlightened folks who don't experience any anxiousness when socializing with others. But the vast majority experience between a little bit or very much. So we'd see 38% say a little bit, 39 say somewhat, so about the same there. And then 17% of you all say very much. You feel quite a bit of anxiety when socializing with new people. So awesome. You're all welcome here. I'm hoping that those of you who experience a higher amount of social anxiety actually find some help in your learning today for yourself, because I do think that part of our journey is working on our own anxiety as well. And those of you who don't struggle with this, hopefully you're gaining tools just to help your clients. So, okay. Great. If you want to see the results here, I can, let's see, are they visible now to folks? Yeah, you can see them there briefly, but I already ran through them. So, okay, let's move on then. Great. Wonderful. So let's talk just briefly about the background, right, of social anxiety disorder. So from a cognitive behavioral perspective, we know that social anxiety is developed and maintained by negative thoughts, behaviors, and physical symptoms. Okay. And so examples of negative thoughts that folks might experience are things like, I'll make a fool of myself, or let's see, the stakes are high, right? What that means is kind of the idea like that there's significant consequences to making mistakes, right? So the stakes are high, or they'll reject me. Examples of behaviors can be really variable. So things like hiding behind parents, maybe in the case of a child or young teenager. Other behaviors that can be kind of avoidant behaviors or safety behaviors. Use of alcohol as a way to manage anxiety in settings, withdrawing or being quiet, leaving social interactions early, or really avoiding socializing altogether, not socializing, right? And physical symptoms that you can likely imagine, because they're similar across most anxiety disorders, right? So things like a rapid heart rate, flushing, sweating, rise in body temperature, things like this, sometimes changes to your ability to vocalize, right? The symptoms can really, really vary there. But as you can imagine, these three clusters of negative thoughts, behaviors, and physical symptoms can really feed off of each other, right? And if left unchecked, unfortunately, they actually can increase the likelihood of these like disappointing social outcomes that the person fears, right? So as these symptoms are racing around, the three of them together, the person may actually be more likely to create the outcome they're fearing, right? Maybe they do end up feeling more distant. Maybe their awkwardness is making it hard to socialize, right? And so it's exciting to think of intervening at different levels here to help people start to feel more in control. Okay. So next I want to talk to you about our case example. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kia, and then we're going to ask you to actually, as you hear an example of Kia's experience of anxiety, to see if you can spot these examples of thoughts, behaviors, and symptoms in her story. Okay, but a bit of background about her first. So of course, I've changed names and some details here to protect her safety, but this is a very real and important client to me, actually, because it was very recent, someone who just touched my heart a lot. I had the pleasure of working with Kia just this past summer, and we got to work for about 10 or 12 sessions together. She's a lovely early 20-year-old young woman who had a long history of experiencing social anxiety. And her story really struck me because her social anxiety was really tied up in people-pleasing behavior, where Kia believed really strongly that the way to win people over and have them drawn to her and like her was to predict what they needed or expected from her and to try to be that person, right? And so she spent a lot of her life kind of guessing if she'd go out with a group of friends, like, how do they want me to be? Am I supposed to be like really fun? Am I supposed to pretend to be outgoing? And am I supposed to like the same things they like, right? And so she found herself often really, really stuck and super anxious. The first time she actually came in as an in-person client, and the first time I saw her in the waiting room, I mean, she was visibly shaky as she came to my office, flushed, tapping her foot. I mean, just the anxiety bit was palpable for her in talking with me as a new person. And the impetus for her starting therapy was she had gone away to college for the first year and had really a pretty horrible year. You know, she did fine academically. She was always strong in that area, but socially it was disappointment after disappointment. And she desperately wanted to feel close and connected to others and simply was not succeeding. So let me tell you a story about kind of the specifics of what would play out for her socially. And again, your job is to try to spot and listen for the negative thoughts, the avoidance behaviors, and the physical symptoms as they cycle through in her story. Okay. So Kia's at college. She's invited to a party by her roommate. She often kind of grabbed onto her roommate as a support person and someone to introduce her to others. And immediately, even before going to the event, she's starting to worry. She's saying things to herself like, I have to act perfectly or they will reject me. They won't think I'm fun enough. I'm not good at this socializing. Others are so natural. Right. So she goes anyway because she's so brave and because she's so motivated to try to connect. As the party moves on, she's kind of sticking close to her roommate, and a conversation ensues with a variety of people about weekend plans. And she can see that people are kind of going around the small circle. And so she's aware now that there will be an expectation. Someone will turn to her to contribute. Right. So her heart rate goes up. She starts to feel flushed. She starts feeling more sweaty, and she's kind of nervous giggling as she's listening to other people talking. The thoughts spin out from here. Everyone is noticing, I'm so awkward, right? Just shut up. How can you get out of this, right? And so she escapes by suddenly needing to go to the bathroom before it's her turn to talk about weekend plans, right? She pulls herself out of the bathroom with lots of effort, goes back out, tries again, and repeats kind of similar cycles until ultimately she decides to leave the party. Now, when she leaves, there's this momentary, beautiful, sweet relief for her, right? For just a moment. I'm out of there. I survived. I got out. But very shortly thereafter, there becomes the cycle of beating herself up, feeling regret, and beginning to worry about the next time, right? So the thoughts are, that was a disaster. I never can see those people again. I need to avoid them. I'm really bad at this. It won't work next time. Okay. So I'm hoping as you listen to that, you could hear how her negative thoughts, her avoidance behaviors, and her physical symptoms are spinning off each other. You get a thumbs up that people were hearing those play out? Great. Okay. So what do we do with someone like Kia? Let's think about how to be helpful, right? So we're going to start by first taking a good history. And there's 3 points I want to suggest we think about as we do that. So the first is we want to learn about their unique experiences of socializing. Your clients won't be quite like Kia. Everyone's different. In the Burns model of team CBT, we'll do that often by using a daily mood log, which is a great tool to gather details. Shweta will talk more about a simplified version of that in a moment. But there's lots of ways you can ask for details. You can do it verbally. You can also use record forms that are often offered in common treatment manuals for social anxiety disorder. I'll point you to one I like later today. We also want you to spend time learning about the client's cultural norms for social interaction so that you really understand the basis at which they're approaching socializing. So you can do that by asking questions about what the client has learned about social expectations in various situations, what's expected of them, right? What do they believe is normal socializing? You can ask questions about their beliefs with peers, with elders, with family, and dating scenarios, different scenarios, right? And then what are their own values, right? So this is what they've learned maybe from culture, from family, from background. What are their own values? And then even asking questions about to what degree they want to uphold the values and learning that they've been exposed to versus move away from it, right? And those types of questions will really help you paint a picture of this person's values around socializing. The other thing we want to attend to is if there's any traumatic experiences that could impact anxiety in either social or performance situations. For example, has your client been experiencing bullying, prejudice, or discrimination, maybe a hostile work environment, or other forms of trauma? If that's the case, if that's present, we want to pause and think that it may not be as simple as teaching cognitive and exposure techniques, because instead there may be like a safety issue, right? They maybe are anxious from their like wisest, best self that's saying this isn't safe, right? And in those cases, we might first need to work on interventions that increase safety through advocacy or other interventions. Okay. Assuming that we have done a great history and really gotten to know the client, and assuming that we have empathized with our client, connected with them, Team CBT, our approach here at Feeling Good Institute, offers a great model for teaching really in-depth empathy with clients, assuming that we're getting great scores on empathy and that we've worked through a client's motivation to change, right? So we're assuming that we've melted away resistance and we have a client who in fact wants to reduce their anxiety and overcome it. Then we're ready to jump into the cognitive model. And I'm ready to let Shweta talk with us about that.
Thank you, Angela. Hi, everybody. Happy November. Continuing with the cognitive model. Cognitive model is based on 3 simple ideas. You feel the way you think. When you're anxious, you're fooling yourself. Anxiety results from distorted, illogical thoughts. When you change the way you think, you can change the way you feel. Cognitive work, it generally, but not always, precedes exposure therapy. There are multiple steps that we cover with a client before starting exposure work for social anxiety. And in order to best help someone like Kia or any of our clients, we need to first be familiar with common types of negative thoughts experienced by individuals with social anxiety. So, what are common examples of negative thoughts that you or your clients experience? Please enter your responses in the chat box to Jill. Jill, as the responses come in, will you please share some with us?
Yes, well, people read ahead and they saw that you were asking, so they already started entering them, which is fantastic. So I have, I'm not good enough. They probably won't like me. I'm a bad mom. I'll sound silly for asking that question.
Absolutely.
I'm a terrible friend.
Yes, I'll put that too.
I am too much for people. I'm not good enough. I never have anything to say. And then I've got a lot on one. I have to act perfect. They won't think I'm good enough. I'm so awkward. I'm so bad at this. And then some people actually, instead of putting examples of negative thoughts, they listed cognitive distortions. So just want to say gold star for knowing your cognitive distortions.
I know they're already talking about it.
Exactly. But there's lots more, but I feel like you've probably got enough here.
Yes, I totally get that. So now let's see what are some of the next slide, please. Yes. So now let's see what are some of the negative thoughts clients experience. Most people will experience some of these thoughts some of the time, but focus with social anxiety disorder experience them in a more debilitating manner. I do not have anything interesting to say. If he does not respond, that means my text was stupid. He probably thinks I'm a loser. I might freeze up, forget, sweat, etc. They can tell how nervous I feel. I can't control my anxiety. They're going to reject me. I shouldn't socialize because I'm not going at it. I will get canceled. Oh, wow. This is what I'm experiencing right now. I can totally relate at that negative thought. The spotlight is on me. There's a lot of pressure. Next slide. So how do we help clients with these negative thoughts? It's not enough to just help clients know their negative thoughts. That is wonderful empathy to know and discuss their thoughts. But knowing the content of our anxious thoughts won't create change. Instead, we need to help them learn how to talk back to the negative thoughts. And to do so, at Feeling Good Institute, we use Daily Mood Log. And Daily Mood Log is a very useful tool developed by Dr. David Burns that helps us to get really specific with our patients. It helps us to set ourselves up for really effective cognitive therapy. Some of you may use a different version of a thought record. If Daily Mood Log is new to you, you can simplify by drawing 3 columns on a piece of paper, and we'll go over the basics. First, item number 1, write the specific moment at the top of the paper. Second, use the first column to write down the unique negative thoughts. Third one, use the second column to identify cognitive distortions in each specific thought. Often there are multiple per thought. For some of those who are new to cognitive distortions, they are internal mental filters or biases that increases our misery, fuel our anxiety, and make us feel bad about ourselves. Our brains are continually processing lots of information. There are lists of cognitive distortions, for example, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, mental filter, jumping to conclusions includes mind reading and fortune telling, emotional reasoning, labeling, should statements. And fourth, have the client write a rebuttal that puts the lie to the negative thought. For example, it cleans up the distortions. The client has to believe the positive thought 100%, and it has to address the negative thought. That is, no fake positive stuff in this column. Fifth one, the client will have to rehearse the new positive thoughts over and over again. The brain takes a while to unlearn the negative thoughts that have been rehearsed for years. So practice of the new positive thoughts is imperative. Now let's take an example of Kia. For Kia, the upsetting event is attending a social event. In the first column, the negative thought is they are going to reject me. Cognitive distortions, jumping to conclusions, mind filter, mental filter, and all or nothing thinking. Helpful, positive rebuttal, they may or may not reject me. I surely do not know what others are thinking. People do not fully reject or approve of anyone. Most people like some things and dislike some things about others. There are many positive things that I offer to others socially, like being a good listener, making others feel good about themselves, being open to adventures. So actually, there are a few resources where you can learn about how to use the daily mood log, identify distortions, and talk back to negative thoughts. In our free webinar on FGI website, there is a paid core skills for effective therapy course. And also there is a David Burns book, which is called When Panic Attacks, which definitely walks through the DML and many cognitive skills. Next, Angela is going to talk with you all about exposure.
Thank you so much, Shweta. That was awesome and really, really clear and well explained. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it just got me reflecting as you were talking about in Kia's example specifically, the cognitive work was really powerful. It actually had never occurred to her, as is true for many clients I work with, that her thoughts are just thoughts and that they might not be entirely valid. And so there was various cognitive techniques we used to help her get to those positive thoughts, things like examine the evidence for a thought, that says she has nothing to offer others. And actually, she made these lists of evidence for and against that and became really aware of all the things she has to offer to other people she's meeting and felt really empowered by those things and talking back to thoughts, just like the example Shweta gave you. However, with most anxiety disorders, cognitive work is not enough. It's not usually enough. We can't be sure. And so often we need to bring in the exposure model. And so we'll be talking about some examples of how to do exposure for social anxiety. Let me give you a bit of background first. So, before we can jump into doing exposure work with clients, there's a number of things we need to prepare the clients for. And so I won't have time to go into detail on all of these. This is kind of high level of things you want to think about before starting exposure. We'll talk about item one the most. But at the high level, we want to discuss the rationale for exposure with the client so that they understand fully and get buy-in. Without that, they often won't follow through anyway. We need to construct a hierarchy, which is really deciding which activities we'll confront that they've been avoiding and that have been fear-inducing for them. We want to banish avoidance and safety behavior, so take away those things they're doing to create a false sense of safety so that they actually have to expose themselves to the scary situations. We also want to prepare for both in-session and out-of-session exposures that we can do. I'll give you some examples of those in a moment. And then build an expectation for repeated practice, right? So one round of exposure is rarely enough. I mean, sometimes you'll get a really powerful exposure session and it will be life-changing. Often clients need to continue to repeat the exposures and get practice over time to really gain the benefits. So we want to build that expectation from the beginning. Okay, so let's talk in more depth about the rationale. As I said, it's really important the client can understand why are we doing this. And I surely don't think we can explain it until we get it, right? So as therapists, we have to really understand the rationale first to then be able to explain it to others. Luckily, if this is new to you, a lot of these treatment manuals will offer whole chapters that the client can read to help them understand the rationale. And of course, you can read those as well. So there's lots of help out there. But here's in front of you is a list of 5 ways in which exposure can be helpful, right? So our rationale for doing it. The first here is that we can identify new anxious thoughts that were missed. Most of your clients, when you're doing a daily mood log or thought record, will be able to remember the thoughts that plague them when they're anxious. Once in a while, they'll miss some that they're just not quite aware of. And when you start exposure, boom, those thoughts just pop right up because it's in real time, right? And we can address those thoughts as we need to. We also have the opportunity to test the anxious thoughts for once. So instead of just assuming that a negative outcome is real, like people will judge me harshly, bad things will happen if I make a mistake socially, right? We get to actually find out what happens if we do these things. So that's an important part of it. Another important part is building tolerance for the anxiety. So we'll do that in exposure by measuring subjective units of distress or some other measure of anxiety that you prefer to use. I say keep it simple. But the value of the measurement of anxiety before and during and after exposure is that the client gets to see how anxiety can kind of wax and wane across exposure. It doesn't just stay the same. And ultimately, they'll get to see that with repetition of the exposure, the anxiety comes down. And that's so powerful and really important learning for our brain. And the fourth one here, building tolerance for social mistakes versus avoiding them. If you've tuned out, tune back in. This is so key to me. And I really want you to focus on this part here with me. The idea here is that many cognitive therapists who don't do exposure spend a lot of time with their clients trying to convince the client that people won't judge them or that they won't make mistakes. Right. So we might think we're being helpful to the client by saying, well, people aren't really that judgmental. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Or we might encourage them saying, your social skills really aren't that bad. I bet you won't even do anything goofy to begin with. Right. But what we know, the secret here is, guess what, folks? People do judge and we do socially awkward things all the time. Right. Because socializing is by nature awkward. It's multiple people coming together with different worldviews. There's constantly these kind of missteps and mishaps that might feel awkward. And so it's a disservice to clients to imply that we can avoid them. So actually inviting social mistakes, and I'll put that in finger quotes, meaning awkward moments, goofy things, is the key to recovery so that we build up our tolerance for having those things happen and realizing we can survive them. We don't even have to avoid them. Okay, we'll talk about a way to do that with clients in a little bit. The last thing you see here is that sometimes it's helpful. Exposure is also helpful as like a way to do a bit of practicing of social skills. Not all of your clients will need it, but there's common things that folks who are socially anxious might struggle with socializing that can hold them back. Simple things like, they're not simple for people, and that's why it's important. So common ones I have to help clients with are how to start new conversations with strangers, how to end conversations, right? That's actually a hard skill for a lot of people. How do you wrap up a conversation when you're kind of done with it before it gets kind of tiresome and boring, right? How to deepen conversations past chit chat, things like that. So these are things we can practice as well. Okay, here's a couple examples, and I'm going to hand it over to LJ to get into some awesome techniques. So these are examples of things you can do in session with clients, whether it's in person or video. You can do this it's not imaginary. You're going to role play these conversations with clients, and you'll be surprised. It might seem easy to you, but to someone with high social anxiety, doing this even with you in a role play where you're going to pretend to be a peer, a teacher, a dating partner, whoever it is, can feel really hard. So things like I mentioned, opening conversations, ending conversations, handling an awkward moment, anything that's hard for them. Okay. Out of office, the sky's the limit. We can do things like just practicing greeting other people, making eye contact. We can request recommendations or help from strangers, and we can do all kinds of things just to draw attention to the self as a way to work on the anxiety. LJ is going to give us a couple specific examples here. Are you ready to jump in, LJ?
Yes, thank you, Angela. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Like Shweta and Angela both said, a little nerves too, getting started with everybody. And when I look at this slide and I think about smile and hello practice, I think of what Angela said a minute ago about a hierarchy often being useful, and that smile and hello can be a great starting point on some of the out of office exposures that we might do. And even I'll often start with people doing smile and hello in the office, and it feels a little bit awkward. And I think that's actually part of what makes it a great starting step, is even in the office, we've been talking to each other, we have a good relationship. And then to just sit there and look each other in the eye and smile and say hello can feel a little bit weird. And it's a great way to get started. And then we can go out into the community to do that. And I think thinking about the rationale, there are a few great rationales behind smile and hello. One is that it can help to address several different specific thoughts that we came up with. Socializing would be too difficult for me. Well, let's go out and see if we can test that out. Or I couldn't handle it if somebody rejected me. We probably will get to experience some small rejections when we do smile and hello, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Also, maybe ideas that people aren't friendly or nobody would want to talk to me, are all different thoughts we might have that we can test by doing smile and hello practice. We also just get to tolerate the anxiety of meeting somebody new or doing something that we're unfamiliar with. It's actually fairly uncommon, at least where I live, for people to just smile and say hello to strangers on the street. So going out and doing something that's a little bit uncommon is also a great way for us to start feeling some of the anxiety and seeing that we can move through it. And as far as how to do the technique, in essence, it's really all there in the name. We're going to go out and we're going to smile and we're going to say hello to people. But then you can see these points here, which are really important details. And mostly they go back to the idea of banishing avoidance that Angela was talking about. So one of the things we want to make sure to do is attempt with everybody who we pass by. Otherwise, a very subtle avoidance is I will choose people who I think look friendly or who I think look like they would be into somebody like me or something like that. And so then I'm kind of rigging the results, and then later I can discount the experience by saying, well, it only really worked because I chose those 3 friendly people. Another one is that we want to make sure and make eye contact. Sort of looking down or avoiding making eye contact is another common way to just lower the intensity a little bit and avoid some of the full impact of the exposure. Similar thing with the audible voice. And then to really kind of take it up another notch, we can add some gestures. We can smile and hello and wave and really practice bringing that attention into ourselves. And before we leave the office, like I said, I would often start by doing this in the office, but then we want to talk about what might be the outcomes. And so I will usually tell my clients, we're going to do this with at least 10 people. And there's probably 3 kinds of outcomes we can anticipate, 2 that are fairly common and one's actually less common, but we might run into it. The most common ones, the first 2, we're going to hope that we meet at least some friendly people. And I don't think I've ever done this where we didn't have some people who seemed genuinely glad to have somebody smile and say hello to them. It's probably not going to be everybody. It may or may not be the majority, just depending on where you are, who you run into. It can vary. The other one that's fairly common is we're going to run into a lot of people who are on their phones or have their earbuds in or who are just not interested in talking. So we'll have some people who won't respond. They'll just walk on by. And that's another great chance for us to see, okay, I can do what I can do and I can tolerate it when things don't go exactly the way I was wanting it to go. And I don't think I've very often, but occasionally you might run into somebody who's grumpy or who just doesn't have a great expression on their face. And so we can be ready for that too, and just be ready to say, well, that's one person. I know there are lots of people. And really, it's good news that I had somebody who was like that on my route today, so that I get to practice being okay with just a little bit of rejection. We can go on to the next intervention where we will start working our way up the hierarchy of things that are uncomfortable to do, at least for most people. So the next one is self-disclosure. And it's another one where the name kind of encapsulates it, but there's subtleties to it. Instead of trying to hide that we're feeling anxious, and you've seen Shweta and Angela and I all do this today, instead of trying to hide it, we're just going to acknowledge it and say, you know what, I actually am feeling a little bit anxious about this. Because the problem is not really that we're feeling anxious. The thing that would really make things a lot worse would be if we were to try and hide that anxiety. And then we would maybe start to feel shame. And if we think about it, like Kia from before, one of her worries was that people could see that she was feeling anxious and that they would then reject her. So this self-disclosure is going to be a powerful way for her to face that fear. Instead of trying to hide it and act like she's not nervous or tell people like, oh no, I'm good, everything's great. She can just tell people. And then she'll get to find out, do people reject her? Because that was also another part of it, that if people could see she was anxious, they would then reject her. So by telling people in a skillful way, she gets to test that belief. And then this also gets around some of the other subtle avoidance that she may have. She has this idea, perhaps, that if she presents herself perfectly, or if she presents herself as always being cool, calm, and collected, that people will accept her. But if instead she presents herself not quite so cool, calm, and collected, she'll get to test whether people really have as high a standards for who they want to socialize as maybe she was believing. And if we look at the next slide, we'll get to see some of the skillful ways that people will do that. So here are just some really direct quotes, and I always find it helpful to ask people permission. And again, I would probably practice this with a client in the office once or twice just to get used to it. And then I also recommend people to write down what they want to say on a card, or of course, everybody now uses their phones. I suggest writing it on a card, and people look at me like I'm crazy because they have their phone right there. But write it down on your phone. And it's not that we're going to want them to go read it to people when they go out into the community. Instead, it's they have it, they can read it and refresh themselves between people that they talk to. Because again, we want to talk to a handful of people. I, again, usually suggest the number 10, though we don't always get all the way up to 10. And when you go and talk to somebody, then you may start feeling a little bit anxious or nervous, and you may have a harder time coming up with the words. So if we can just kind of prep ourselves each time before the conversation, it will make it a little bit easier to do this in a skillful way. And then I'll just read here what we'd have Kia say potentially. Could I speak to you for a moment? You know, I just wanted to let you know that ever since I was a kid, I've struggled with shyness, and I've felt really ashamed, so I've been hiding it from everybody. Today, I've decided that I'm not going to be ashamed or hide my anxious feelings anymore. So instead, I'm telling people that I'm shy. I wonder, what are your thoughts about being shy? And is that something to be ashamed of? And so you can see here that's really powerful, and it also helps Kia to start making a connection. One of the rules of doing exposure therapy is that if you're going to have your clients do something, you have to do it also. And so self-disclosure is actually something that I've practiced as well. I have a tendency to want to look emotionally perfect or something like that. And so I got an assignment once to go to a park, and I had to talk to several different people, and I would say to them, you know, very much the way this starts off, could I speak to you for a second? Well, I just wanted to let you know that all my life I felt like I was supposed to be emotionally perfect. And so I've hidden my feelings of fear or sadness or anger. And I've decided I'm not going to be ashamed of my feelings anymore. And that's why I'm telling you about this. And it was really an incredible day. And to go back to the idea of preparing for outcomes, I did have a pretty big range of outcomes. There was one person I talked to who like almost immediately gave me a hug and then was like, wait a minute, I'm not a hugger. This is not what I do. And then just as we talked, she also had similar struggles. And it was probably the fastest I've ever felt like a really close connection with somebody. And then another person, we sat on a bench and talked for a little while, and he told me about his sister who was having some problems. And then there was a third person, when I talk about it hitting the whole range, who just turned around and looked at me and said, well, why do you do that? And it felt a little bit judgmental for me. And as we talked, what it turns out was his partner has the same pattern, and he was really frustrated with his partner. They just had an argument about it the night before. And so he was genuinely curious, but he was also a little bit like, this doesn't make sense to me. So I had a real range of experiences and got to find out what that's like to talk with people and share something, and have some people who love it and some people are like, well, I don't know so much about this. And if we look at the next slide, we can see one other sort of self-disclosure. Angela talked about Kia earlier, that she would be sweating and shaking and she would want to leave and go to the bathroom and try to pull herself together. And again, thinking about the idea of banishing avoidance, we want to twist that a little bit. And instead of going away and trying to like compose ourselves and hide our symptoms, to let people know about them. And so you can see here this example. You know, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get really anxious at these networking events, and it can be so awkward, and I can tell I'm blushing and shaking already. And then I love that it has this question at the end. Do you ever feel nervous at these events? The great thing about putting that question at the end is, one, you have done the hard part of letting people know about this symptom, and then you also get to have this connection. Because I'm going to say, well, if we look at our survey a second ago, over 95% of us feel at least a little bit socially awkward and socially nervous at these kinds of things. And so that'll give that person permission to start talking about themselves. And again, we can start getting into a conversation and things will start to flow, and we'll quickly often feel that our anxiety starts to drop as we have this person we can relate and connect to. I'll pass it back to you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you so much, LJ. I'll just add one more anecdote about Kia that reminds I'm reminded of when you share that, and a time she actually used the self-disclosure regarding symptoms so effectively. And she had been hesitating to go meet up with two friends who'd reached out to her after there'd been a bit of a rift in the relationship a while back, and she was feeling really eager to reconnect with them, cared a lot about them, but really awkward and just kind of petrified of showing up. And she kept saying, I'm going to get there and I can't even imagine, I'm probably going to be like crying before I get to the dinner table, and I'll be like shaking, and they're going to just think I'm so weird. And we remembered this power of self-disclosure. And so in session, she took this huge step to send a text message to these two women in advance and say, I'm so excited to reconnect with you two, and it means so much to me. I also know I'm going to be a nervous wreck. Please expect me to be crying and shaking when I show up at the table. And of course, the result, as you can imagine, if you got that text from someone you wanted to see, was just this outpouring of love from these two friends of hers, and greeted her in the parking lot with big hugs. She said in the end, she cried, but it was more like joyful tears of the reconnection. And I mean, she just felt so much relief from having put that out there even before showing up. And it was just such a celebration and success point for her. And she tells me she's continued to use that just with all kinds of situations going forward. So thank you, LJ. Okay, shame attacking. This is the big money, exciting technique here that if we're thinking of a hierarchy, tends to be one that's harder for folks. So if you haven't heard of this term before, it's possible you've heard of something called the comfort crusher movement. Comfort crusher. It's been kind of this popularized through social media movement of folks doing things that might involve like challenging themselves to do like tough things in public, embarrassing, outrageous things. Shame attacking was actually a term coined by Albert Ellis, many years ago, and really popularized by David Burns in his book When Panic Attacks and in the Team CBT community. What is it? Well, we purposefully do things that could be perceived as outrageous or goofy in public to draw attention to the self, to banish that avoidance that normally happens. So instead of fearing some social mishap, again, I'm using finger quotes for those of you who might just be listening, we invite them, right? So we do something goofy to draw the attention, hoping that we'll learn to tolerate the anxiety or discomfort, and find out whether people will judge or not, and learn that we can tolerate the outcome either way. Because remember, my secret is some people will judge, right? We don't want to naively assume no one will judge. We want to say that's okay. Some will judge, some won't, and I can be okay regardless, right? So what are examples of this? Well, really, the sky is the limit. You and your client should be creative. You can look up comfort crusher movement for examples. You can read When Panic Attacks. The Team CBT community, both the FGI therapists and our larger community that we've trained, are really skilled at doing this. We've been, there's a shame attacking Olympics once in a while where people submit their best. We had a retreat for our therapists this fall and did a bunch of shame attacking together, and there were some real winners. So let me give you some examples of the types of things folks have done. Dancing on the street at a park, singing out loud. Hopefully you're not a great singer, otherwise it's less shameful to do it, right? One of my favorites, Arnie Oliveira, one of our therapists in Florida, stood at the beach, and he took one of those huge signs of all the beach rules, no litter, no campfires, and in his full volume, just like announced all the rules to everyone who could hear him on the beach, and everyone's looking and odd, and he's bright red as he does it. I was so proud of him. Outrageous clothing, the key is what feels embarrassing to the client, right? What feels different to them. Seen people do fake marriage proposals. I mean, again, the sky is the limit. And so you would decide to do this with your client, and you would decide, are you able to do it together? If so, I say do it together, right? If you do in-person sessions and have access physically to your client, it's a great service to them to do the first round together and then assign some. If you do not have physical access to your clients for whatever reason, whether it's video therapy or some other limitations, then you assign them to do this on their own, right? You start with what they're able to do. Some folks will go along on a video feed, right? If you have a mobile version of a video feed to do these things together. Often the hierarchy, doing it with someone is easier than doing it alone, right? And so you'll just put that in your hierarchy as you move up the steps. Let's look at some of Kia's examples. So we had a pretty simple day out shame attacking. We did about 2 hours worth of shame attacking and focused on these 3 activities. She actually didn't find smile and a hello hard. at that phase. And so maybe we did a bit of those as warm-ups, but didn't even make them officially on our hierarchy. So we focused on 3 things: asking questions without ordering anything. Some of you might be perplexed by that and say, why is that challenging? But to key of social anxiety was like never be a burden to anyone. And so the idea of going into a bakery and asking questions about what's in the case and not ordering anything felt like really, really hard for her. So we did that multiple times. We did silly walking down the street, and we defined silly walking as just like goofy movement. It eventually morphed into the next item, which was dancing down the street and dancing on street corners. So silly walking might involve like doing squats while you walk, walking backwards, high knees, marching, just all kinds of combo of things. So what was some of her learning? Let me give you some examples. So for the first item, asking questions without ordering anything, I should mention, I always have them write down the learning, right? We pull out our phones and they jot down, because the learning actually cycles you all the way back to Shweta's daily mood log, right? Remember how she's having them write positive thoughts? When you do an activity like this, they're going to have new positive thoughts that they've learned. And we want them to add those back to that mood log, right? So some examples of what she learned from asking questions without ordering anything was that actually no one was upset, that people seemed to like to be helpful, even if they seemed mildly annoyed, it was okay, and that she felt empowered to be allowed to have her own needs. She also had a sense that she felt, she noticed that she felt less anxious when she kept doing it, right? So the themes there, no horrible outcomes, it got easier over time. Even if people were mildly annoyed, I didn't sense any annoyance at all. But she said maybe this one person was, and she decided she was okay with that. She could tolerate his annoyance. The silly walking and the dancing, there were also some great learning. She said things like, we did have at least one person give us a weird look, and that often happens when you're doing these things, right? Because it is unique and different. So she said, the person who gave me the weird look doesn't have any power over me. That was a big win, right? Most people smiled and seemed to admire me. And that was a huge revelation, was that she realized that some people were kind of impressed, right? Like they'd give us a high five, or they'd be like, that's amazing, right? Like kind of acknowledging the bravery or courage. And that was really exciting to her. Another really powerful learning was I can do hard things despite my anxiety, and that being silly felt freeing. Right. And so overall, her report is we're like wrapping up treatment at the end of the summer. She's saying things that having done the shame attacking, she said that normal socializing suddenly felt so much easier, because she kept remembering doing these really hard things, dancing on the street corner, and saying, if I can dance on the street corner and tolerate people's reactions and be okay, I can talk about my weekend plans at a party, right? I can take that risk. I can speak up in these more normal social situations. And that really, really stuck with her. Okay. Great. So let's talk about some summary points. And actually, as I do this, you're welcome to start chatting any questions you have to Jill. We can kind of get ahead. She's probably already getting questions. It's possible. But if you had any you wanted to ask, go ahead and put those in. I'll just spend a moment summarizing here. So today we want you to leave with some of these points: that social anxiety is quite common, that common themes to the negative thoughts, Shweta gave you a lot of them, but common themes are a low belief in their own social abilities. They're like, I can't do it, I'm not good at it, and a high belief in the costs of making social mistakes. This will be catastrophic. There will be a horrible outcome if I don't do a good job. Right? We also want you to remember that anxiety is maintained by avoidance, and so exposure exercises work against that. And I always want you to know that more help is available if this is new to you. We've mentioned a couple of resources, which I'll summarize again now. So When Panic Attacks by David Burns is a great book. It's written actually to your client as a self-help book, but secretly serves as an amazing training tool for therapists as well. So please read it. My favorite treatment manual for social anxiety is from the Treatments That Work series. It's called Managing Social Anxiety, a Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Approach. Again, managing social anxiety is all you have to remember there, and that it's the series called Treatments That Work. They have both a workbook for the client and a therapist manual, which if you like to follow instructions, it's really comprehensive and a great guide. That's by Hope Heimberg and Turk. You can also refer to FGI, come to FGI for consultation. We have trainers here who can provide consultation. And of course, we have great therapists who can work with your clients in intensive therapy model, which is like a high dose of therapy over a short period of time, or in traditional weekly therapy. So hopefully those are all helpful resources for folks who want to learn more. Let's take some questions, shall we, Jill?
Sounds good. First, I will say that we have way more questions than we will have time to answer. Actually, I had several sent to me throughout, and then when Angela, you just made that comment, I got a whole host that I can't even read right now because I already have a list of so many. So what I'll say is we will capture all the questions that you sent me, and it's been suggested to me that we even do like a blog or something after these kinds of webinars where we answer some of your questions. So I'm gonna pitch that to the team, and we're gonna try to maybe get to some of these questions, and maybe we'll do a follow-up because there's so much interest in what you guys are teaching. So I will just spend a couple minutes reading you guys some questions, and then we'll wrap up. How about this one? For LJ, I feel like you've already answered this, so maybe just a quick response to what if I myself have social anxiety and I'm nervous about doing role play with my patients?
Well, I think finding somebody else to do the role play with first might be a great idea, but starting to really, you could go through all the steps we've talked about. You could use Shweta's cognitive things and try to find out what are the thoughts that are getting in your way, and then talking back to those. But you'll also at some point have to do some exposure and practice role plays, maybe with a friend or colleague, and then also eventually start to do them with your clients.
Great. And another question. Let's see, a couple people asked this question. I think it's a good one. They were worried that telling people that self-disclosure, that telling people that you're anxious or have a social anxiety disorder is some form of reassurance seeking or actually avoidance. Someone said it in a different way. Wouldn't the advanced texting ahead of the social situation be considered a safety behavior? And Angela, I wonder if you have a thought on that. I'm happy also to respond to
Jill
that.
will now respond to that question. That's a great question.
Yeah, right. Well, I would say that really our goal is to help our patients to be more connected, right? And so I just think you have to think to yourself, what is the function of this behavior? And I think the function of sharing your vulnerability or your flaws with another person is actually connection, and it's reducing your own shame. And so I think it serves a very helpful function, in this purpose. But I think it's reasonable if someone is compulsively, like telling someone after, like before every interaction, oh, I just wanted to remind you, I have social anxiety, if they're very clearly using it to sort of let themselves off the hook, or if it's interfering in their like connection with other people, then it seems problematic. Right. And did you have anything else to add to that, Angela?
No, I think that was a great way to think about it.
Okay. What if clients insist that they already know how it's going to play out since they've already had bad experiences before? I don't know, Angela or LJ, do one of you guys want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is that it sounds like that's a negative thought, right? That they're saying some version, they're having the thought that this will turn out badly. It's been bad before, right? And so there's some distortions in that line of thinking, right? That they're jumping to conclusions. And it would be our job to put that thought on the mood log and work on it, right? The truth is they probably have had a lot of bad, challenging, not all, many may have had a lot of really challenging, hurtful experiences. Maybe they've been rejected a lot. And so they also may need just a lot of empathy from you in that moment to really know that you're hearing the extent of their suffering and pain and how scary it is. Right. But if we give into that line of thinking and kind of become hopeless ourselves, then we're actually validating the fear and the anxious thought. And so by doing empathy and then putting it on the mood log to work on it, it really gives us a path to avoid the hopelessness about it and to stay on the path of talking back to that thought. And if needed, again, some people do need some skill building as a way to help them shift how socializing is turning out, right? We can reduce the anxiety. Sometimes skill building is also needed, and there's a bit of there's plenty of approaches to help with that.
Thanks, Angela. I was just noticing another question I had about the survey, but I think Mike, maybe you can drop it in one more time, but I think it's working for people now. Let's see, I'll do one more question for you guys. And then, like I said, we'll consider how to, maybe offer another Q&A on this. Might be a great idea.
Yeah.
We've already got plenty of questions we could use for that. And then I'll go to the next slide. Somebody asked, let me just see this one. Sorry. Yeah, this is great. One pattern I've noticed is folks experience difficulty challenging their thoughts because they are judging others in the way they don't want to be judged. For example, they might think others are scrutinizing my clothing, and I know this because I'm scrutinizing their clothing. And do you have recommendations for helping folks with this line of thinking? And I'll just give you guys, you guys can answer this, but I just want to say, I think the goal that we've tried to convey today is that a lot of working on social anxiety is acceptance. We're not actually telling people that everything is going to go great, that everyone is going to love you. We're actually working on people accepting that people might judge me, and that's okay, right? If I do goofy things in public, people might actually think that's goofy. And my goal is actually to help my patients to feel okay with that, right? So maybe they judge people, maybe people judge them, and that's okay. Do you have any other thoughts to add to that?
That sounded perfect to me, Jill. That's just exactly what I was thinking, is that, well, I don't need to convince them that people won't judge them. I need to convince them or help them learn that they can be okay with being judged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And some of the most powerful outcomes are when folks, realize like kind of this attitude too, that maybe they're okay with people judging because they don't even want to be close to people who would be that judgmental. And sometimes it shifts their internal sense of judgment too. I've watched socially anxious people who are really spend a lot of time judging others become accepting of others in the process as well, right? Giving other people space to be their messy selves and to be imperfect. And that's a really joyful outcome when that works as well. And that the cognitive and exposure model will help move people in that direction. If we just work the model, it'll help them through this.
So Angela, I'll have you just forward to the last.
Yep.
We'll follow up with people. We have lots of great training opportunities, and we'll follow up with you to give you some information via email, but we hope that you'll join us the first Wednesday of every month for our didactics and our Q&As. You can skip to the very last slide, Angela, just so I can wrap up on time for people. You can keep going and keep going. So yeah, let me say thank you to everybody for joining us today for this really insightful webinar. Thank you to our presenters, and we hope that you all found it valuable and that it provided you with some practical tools to help your patients with social anxiety. And if you're considering learning more about Team CBT, we do offer certification and training programs. You can find out more on our website, feelinggoodinstitute.com. And if you have questions about certification or training, you can contact certification at feelinggoodinstitute.com. And if you know someone who could benefit from our services, whether that's a friend, a family member, or a client, you can see the list of therapists that are available on our website, feelinggoodinstitute.com. So as always, it's our commitment to be helpful to you. We really believe strongly in the power of sharing knowledge and building meaningful connections and building a community of skilled therapists. So if you have any questions for us, any feedback, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We're really here to support you in any way that we can. So we hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Shweta and LJ. It's great to have you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.